Hi, my name is Nishant Shah, and I am the professor of Aesthetics and Cultures of Technology at ArtEZ University of the Arts in the Netherlands. In another world, this would have been an in-person conversation at the Schloss Solitude Academy in Stuttgart. But in these days where pathology of touch and suspicion of proximity have become the norm, these days when we are experiencing the precariousness of life and uncertainty of the future collectively, I am instead coming to you on a screen, wrapped in the rectangles that have now defined a large part of our lives. To make things a little bit more bearable, this lecture is divided into three standalone parts and designed as an invitation for dialogue, discussion, questions, and speculation. And I hope that you will break through the black mirrors of this interaction and engage with these questions about the scarcity of future and the state of constant catastrophization. When Elke Aus de Moor, the director of Solitude, approached me with the invitation for this lecture in a world which was very different, I was following and researching various online conversations around fakeness and fake news. We were preparing for my new book called Really Fake, co-created with Alexandra Juhas. Then I was thinking that there is something strange happening to our idea of the future. There were two characteristics of the future as we understand it that were particularly of interest. One, that the future was being discovered as being in a state of crisis, just on the edge of a catastrophe and very uncertain. Second, that the future was necessarily being discussed as fake and that we could no longer plan for it because the capacity to tell future truths seems to have collapsed. This idea of the future in crisis and future as fake pervades almost all our global and immediate conversations, right? So be it the climate change deniers, the anti-vaxxers, the flat earth advocates, men's rights activists, Brexiters, incels, neo-Nazi movements, fascist dictators eroding democracy, building walls, attacking their own people. These two characteristics seem to be the common point. They all believe that the state of the world that we are in is heading to a future catastrophe, and the future is scarce. And they also believe that the current state of interventions and reforms, environmental justice, women, queer, trans, and racial diversity, data and evidence-driven policy, and economic and labor equity are all projecting a future that is fake. It's important to understand that while we might call a lot of these conspiracies of 4chan fake news, these groups in fact characterize the other as perpetuating fakeness. We are their fake news. And the work that we do is often what seems to propel the future in a state of crisis and our vision of the future as fake. So I want to suggest that apart from the ideological and political contestation of whose future is more fake, there is a technological entry point into examining these ideas of the future, because something strange has happened to time. It's good to remember that time is a technology of organization and measurement. It is what Stephen Clark would call a human-centered technology, where the technology becomes invisible and becomes so fundamental in our conception of who we are, were, and will be, that we forget that it is in fact a technological construct. Time is one such technology, and the way it helps organize our individual and collective experiences is by giving us models by which to make sense of the past and the future. The way in which it makes a difference between the past or history and the future is by applying two different paradigms of meaning making upon them, right? So I'm going to propose to us that thinking through time as a technology, the past is a function of probability and the future a function of possibility. Now, let me see if I can illustrate this to make the distinction clear. Let's say that I throw my phone up in the air. I won't because I love my phone. But let's say if I were to throw up my phone, what would happen next? Most of us will say that the phone will fall down. It seems obvious. We don't need complex physics or formulae to understand velocity or the principles of motion and gravity to tell us that the phone will fall back on the ground. We know this because we have seen this over and over again. If things are thrown up, they will fall down. If it has happened once, it will happen again. And if we see that it happens over and over again, then we know that the chances of it happening are so high that we don't think of any other outcomes for that action. This is what we call pattern recognition. This is the realm of logic, which helps us compute what Wendy Chung calls our habitual practices, because we don't have to think about them when we perform them. It's probability driven, and it allows us to make casual and correlative truths possible. This is how we make history and understand it. History is subject to computation of time through the lens of logic. It is always known, and it can be demonstrated. History claims factuality through pattern recognition and becomes fixed in its meaning. Because history is fixed, it can also often be proven to be wrong and fake. However, if we were to ask the same question to a mathematician, and if it's a mathematician who subscribes to uncertainty principles and quantum logic, they will tell you that it's almost impossible to answer the question of what will happen when I throw my phone up in the air. Simply because in mathematics, they will have to rely not on probability and algorithmic chances, but on possibility and imaginative speculation. A mathematician would have to compute a series of variables and look at what is possible. So for example, a monkey could jump across the room, catch my phone mid-air and run away with it. My phone might decide at that moment to disintegrate into nothing and just disappear. Or a wormhole might open up, my phone might travel through that into another dimension where another Nishant Shah is recording this talk. It might fall on his head, kill him, thus causing the first interdimensional mystery of whether this is murder or suicide. So bizarre and improbable as these scenarios are, the mathematician who knows of these variables would have to compute for the possibility of it happening, right? No matter how small the chances are. The future, mathematically speaking, is uncertain, unknown, and without a truth. The future cannot be proven, but only computed in all its possibility. And so complex is this task that it becomes impossible to actually hold it to a truth. It can always only be a fake, because all possibilities are fake till one of them becomes the truth. So I go back to my earlier point about something strange happening to future. The claims that it is in a state of catastrophization and it is a fake, it is a bizarre conversation to make simply because it's so obviously true. The future is always in a state of crisis, where we don't yet know which possibility will materialize, which model of the future will work. And it's always going to be fake because if only one possibility will come to life, all the others will automatically be proved false or fake. Why then are these large swaths of people who are angry and frightened suddenly discovering these as new truths, that the future is in a state of crisis, and it is, till it happens, fake? Or in other words, when did we start putting the burden of verification on the future as something that has already happened and started dismissing it as fake? My proposition to us is that this is because something as strange has happened to time in the age of computation. That the computer, which is actually a very expensive time counting machine, as it becomes the default mode of making sense of our worlds, has introduced a strange invisibility in our measurement and hence conception of the future. It does so by putting the lens of logic and probability, of statistics and modeling onto the idea of future. When we think of a scarce future, it's a future that is quantified. And this quantification is largely being done by statistically rendering machines. When there is complaint of a scarce future, we are tying ourselves to pattern recognition and machine probability. And if we buy in this idea of future as fake, we are putting upon it the burden of verification that's not about the desirable or the needed future, but a future which could be computed. That when we think of our future as fake, it means that we are rejecting the possibility of the future in favor of the probability of history. In the next two parts of this lecture, I will try and illustrate this making of the quantified future through two stories. One is about people who woke up one morning to find that they were dead, and two is about computers who thought that they were human beings.